She cleaned the trash alone, until the CEO heard her singing the same song. The echo of a soft melody floated through the marble halls of the Silvercrest building at dawn. The janitor's cart creaked gently as a small figure pushed it down the corridor. She was no taller than the mop she carried, just 7 years old, barefoot, her clothes too big, her hair tied in a lopsided ponytail, but her voice, though quiet, was filled with emotion. Amara hummed the tune while scrubbing the tile floor with determination, her small hands red from the cold water. Her mother always told her not to sing too loud, someone might notice. But today, alone and surrounded by silence, she let her voice rise a little more. The song was an old lullaby, one her mother used to sing when nights were cold and food was scarce. Amara didn't remember the words exactly, just the melody that wrapped her in a blanket of memory and longing. Outside, the city of New York was just waking up. Inside the building, the janitorial crew had finished for the night, but Amara and her mother stayed behind to finish the top floor. Her mother was in another room, scrubbing a glass wall. Amara always helped, quietly, obediently, and never asking questions. Today, though, something unexpected happened. Footsteps echoed from the elevator, sharp and hurried. Amara froze. No one was supposed to be here yet. She shrank behind her cart, hoping whoever it was would pass by. But then the footsteps stopped. A tall man stood at the far end of the hall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, leather shoes polished to a shine. He held a phone in one hand, a coffee in the other, but his gaze was locked on her. Or rather, on the sound she'd just made. Amara bit her lip. She had been singing. Had he heard? The man's brows were furrowed, his face pale. He stepped closer, slowly, as if in a trance. "That song," he murmured, so low she barely heard him. Amara didn't move. Her mop dripped onto the tiles. The man crouched down, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn that?" Amara blinked. "My mom sings it. She says it's from a long time ago." The man's eyes widened. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the ring on his finger, a small band with a hidden inscription. His voice cracked. "I haven't heard that song in over 20 years. He didn't know how to say it yet, but the song had been sung once before by someone he'd loved and lost, someone who had disappeared without a trace. He stared at Amara as if seeing a ghost, and in that moment something shifted. He had no idea that this little girl, this child cleaning floors before sunrise, was about to unravel every truth he had buried, every lie, every betrayal, every silence, and none of them would ever be the same again. Pergantaro ChatGPT, Amara tilted her head, unsure why the man looked so strange. Grown-ups often looked tired or distracted, but this man looked haunted. His eyes were locked onto hers, like he was trying to solve a riddle that had no answer. "What's your name?" he asked gently, crouching lower to her level. She hesitated. "Amara." His breath hitched. That name. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since a cold autumn night when a woman named Sophia walked away from him without a word. He remembered everything about her, the way she laughed, the way she cried, and most of all, the lullaby she used to sing when they lay in bed dreaming of a future that never came. "Do you know your last name?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. Amara shook her head. "Mama just says I'm Amara. We don't talk about last names." That made his chest tighten. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't look away. Something about her eyes. They were too familiar, big, dark, and solemn, like Sophia's. But there was something else too. Something that made him feel unsteady. He stood slowly, trying to regain composure. He couldn't let emotion get in the way, not here, not in his own building. He was the CEO of this empire, and this child, she was just a cleaner's daughter, or so it seemed. "Is your mother here?" he asked. Amara pointed down the corridor without a word. He walked past her, his heartbeat quickening with every step. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, an explanation, a coincidence, a trick of fate. But as he turned the corner, he stopped dead. There she was, Sophia, on her knees, scrubbing the glass wall with trembling hands. Her back was to him, but that silhouette, it was unmistakable. Her hair was tied in a bun, but he knew that neck, that posture. Time had passed, but he would know her anywhere. "Sophia," he whispered. She flinched, the sponge slipping from her hand. Slowly she turned, and when their eyes met, her breath caught. "Julian," she said, barely audible. He stepped closer, every nerve in his body screaming. "It's you." Sophia looked like she might run. Her eyes darted toward Amara, then back to Julian. "You weren't supposed to see us," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "I never wanted you to know." "Know what?" he demanded, his voice rising. She stepped back, her hands trembling. "It was better this way. I had no choice." But Julian couldn't breathe. The pieces were falling into place far too quickly. The child, the lullaby, her name. His eyes locked onto hers with the force of years lost. "Is she mine?" he asked. Sophia didn't answer, not with words, just one slow, aching nod. The silence that followed her nod was thick and suffocating. Julian stood frozen, trying to process the impossible truth that had just unfolded before him. The walls of the Silvercrest building, which had always felt so stable and strong, suddenly seemed fragile, like glass ready to crack. Sophia looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She picked up the sponge she had dropped, her fingers trembling as she tried to pretend that things could go back to normal, that maybe if she just kept scrubbing, this conversation might vanish. "How long?" Julian asked, his voice low and shaking. "How long have you been hiding her from me?" Sophia closed her eyes. "Since the beginning," she whispered. "Since I found out I was pregnant. I left because I didn't want to ruin your life." He took a step closer. "You think not knowing my own daughter existed made it better?" Sophia's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You were building an empire, Julian. I saw the pressure on you, the way your father hovered over everything you did. You were going to marry Victoria. It was all arranged, remember?" Julian flinched at the name. Victoria. His father's choice, a merger more than a marriage. That's not an excuse. "It was survival," she shot back, her voice breaking. "I had nothing. I didn't want our daughter growing up being someone's shame. So I disappeared." "And you thought mopping the floors of my building was a better life for her?" he asked, anger rising beneath the heartbreak. Sophia finally looked at him, fire in her eyes. "No, I thought staying close to you, even if from the shadows, was better than lying completely. I told her you were someone far away, someone important, but I never imagined she'd sing that song." Julian rubbed his temple, trying to breathe. That melody, it had haunted him. It was part of the reason he never remarried. Every time he heard a note of it in his memory, it pulled at something too painful to name. He glanced back down the corridor, where Amara still stood quietly by the janitor's cart. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but her small frame was rigid, listening, waiting. "She looks like you," he said softly. "No," Sophia said. "She looks like you." Julian's chest ached. "I want to know her," he whispered. Sophia hesitated. Her defenses rose again. "It's not that simple." He nodded slowly, his voice firm. "No, it never was." And just as he turned to take a step toward Amara, a sudden voice echoed from the hallway behind them. "Julian!" A cold, commanding tone snapped. It was Charles Langston, Julian's father and chairman of the board. He stood there with narrowed eyes, taking in the scene. The janitor, the child, the CEO, and the broken silence that could destroy everything. Charles Langston's eyes flicked from Julian to Sophia, then to the child at the end of the corridor. His lips pressed into a tight line, and the tension in his jaw was visible even beneath his sharp suit. "Is there something you'd like to explain to me, Julian?" he asked coolly, though the fury behind his words was unmistakable. Julian stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Charles and Amara. "This is a personal matter. You don't need to be involved." Charles raised an eyebrow. "When your personal life threatens the reputation of this company, I assure you, I am involved." Sophia moved slightly, her posture guarded. She knew Charles. Years ago, he had made his disdain for her painfully clear. She was the girl from the wrong side of the city, the one who had distracted his son from his future. Julian didn't waver. "That little girl is my daughter." Charles's expression didn't change. "With her?" he asked, his tone slicing the air like a knife. Sophia's eyes darkened. She opened her mouth, but Julian cut in before she could speak. "Yes, and you will speak about her with respect. Both of them." Charles chuckled bitterly. "You've always had a weakness for sentiment, Julian. I thought I raised you better than that." Julian's voice hardened. "No, father. You raised me to put power over people, to chase titles instead of truth, but I won't make the same mistake again." Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you understand what this could cost you? A scandal like this, an illegitimate child with a cleaning woman. Investors will panic. The press will feast on it." Sophia looked down, shame flooding her cheeks, but Julian stood taller. "Then let them feast," he said, "because I will not turn my back on my daughter. Not now, not ever." Charles's face twisted with fury. "You're throwing away everything we built." "No," Julian said quietly. "I'm finally building something real." There was a pause, a long, dangerous silence. Then Charles turned his gaze to Sophia. "Leave now, before I have security escort you out." Julian stepped in front of her again. "If she leaves, I leave. Effective immediately." Charles' eyes widened. "You'd resign?" Julian didn't blink. "I'd burn this entire building to the ground before I abandoned them again." Charles stared at his son, his heir, the man he had molded, controlled, and shaped into a perfect executive. Now that man was choosing a little girl with a mop and a melody over everything. And for the first time, Charles didn't know what to say. Suddenly, Amara's small voice called from the hallway, "Mum?" They all turned. She was clutching the handle of the cart, her voice trembling. "Are we in trouble?" Julian looked at her, and with every ounce of certainty in his soul, he said, "Not anymore." Julian walked toward Amara slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. She stood still, trying to read his face. Behind her small frame, the mop handle wobbled slightly, and for a second she looked like she might cry. But then he knelt before her, one hand reaching out gently. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft, trembling. "I should have been there all along." Amara looked up at him. "You knew the song," she said, like it was the only thing that truly mattered. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Your mum used to sing it to me when we were young. It's how I knew something was missing from my life. I just didn't know it was you." Sophia stepped behind them, her arms crossed tightly, trying to hold herself together. But when she saw Amara take Julian's hand, small fingers curling into his palm, her heart broke wide open. Julian glanced back at Sophia. "Let me try," he said. "Let me be part of her life. Whatever it takes, I'll do it." Sophia nodded slowly, the fear still lingering in her eyes. "It won't be easy. She's never had a father before, and You've done everything," Julian interrupted. "Everything a mother could. I see that now. I just want to be there too." Before Sophia could respond, the elevator at the end of the hall pinged open again. Out stepped Victoria. She was as polished as ever, in heels and a tailored coat, her expression unreadable. She paused when she saw them, Julian kneeling beside a little girl, Sophia standing close by. Her gaze narrowed as the tension in the air thickened once more. "I came for the board meeting," she said, her eyes on Julian. "But clearly I'm interrupting something intimate." Julian stood slowly, still holding Amara's hand. "This is my daughter." Victoria blinked. "Excuse me." He didn't repeat it. Sophia stepped forward. "I'm her mother. We worked here." Quietly. Victoria's eyes darted from one face to the next. "And how long has this been going on?" she asked, bitterness curling in her voice. "Since before you and I ever started," Julian said simply. "Before the board, before the company. She was my past, and now she's part of my future." Victoria's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. She simply turned and walked briskly back into the elevator, her heels clicking sharply, the door closing behind her with a cold finality. Julian turned back to Sophia and Amara, his heart pounding. He knew the path ahead would be difficult. His father wouldn't back down, and the media would have questions. But as he looked into Amara's wide, searching eyes, he knew one thing for certain. He would face whatever came next, because this was his daughter, and no force on earth would make him walk away again. The morning sun cast long beams of light through the glass atrium as Julian led Sophia and Amara into his private office for the first time. It felt surreal, bringing them into the world he had built without ever knowing it belonged to them too. The room, usually cold and pristine, now felt warmer just by their presence. Amara's eyes wandered across the shelves lined with awards and framed photographs. She moved slowly, like someone walking through a museum, pausing in front of a photo of Julian shaking hands with a world leader. "Is that really you?" she asked, tilting her head. Julian smiled. "That's me, a lot younger and a lot more serious." Amara turned to him, thoughtful. "You still look serious." Sophia stifled a laugh, and for a fleeting moment, something light passed between them, like a tiny spark of what could be, but it didn't last. Julian's expression shifted as he closed the blinds. "We need to talk about what happens next." Sophia tensed. "You mean what your father is going to do?" Julian nodded. "Charles won't take this quietly. He's already calling board members. He'll try to paint this as a scandal, use it to take back control." Sophia sat down slowly. "And Victoria?" "She won't say anything. Her silence is her punishment. She doesn't want her name in the headlines next to mine if this explodes." Amara climbed onto the leather sofa, hugging her knees. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small. Julian looked at her with a mix of admiration and sorrow. This child had endured more than most adults, and still had the courage to ask a question like that with hope in her voice. "Yes," he said firmly, "because now I know about you, and I'm not letting go." There was a knock at the door. Julian moved quickly to answer it, his assistant standing just outside with a pale face. "Sir," she whispered, "your father has called an emergency board meeting, today, noon, and he's demanding your presence." Julian's jaw clenched. "Of course he is." The assistant hesitated. "There's more. He's already leaked a statement to the press, about the child, about everything." Julian's heart dropped. He turned to Sophia, whose face had gone white. Amara looked between them. "Did I do something wrong?" Sophia rushed to her, hugging her tight. "No, sweetheart, not one thing." But Julian's eyes darkened. His father had declared war, and now the fight to protect his daughter would become public. The boardroom felt colder than usual when Julian walked in. The 12 members sat around the long mahogany table, stiff-backed and quiet. At the head of the table sat Charles Langston, composed and deliberate, hands folded over a manila folder with the Silvercrest logo stamped across it. He didn't rise to greet Julian. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end. "Have a seat, Julian." Julian didn't sit. "This isn't just business anymore, it's personal, and I won't let you weaponize my daughter's existence to serve your narrative." A low murmur passed through the board. One woman adjusted her glasses. Another man cleared his throat, but no one spoke. Charles remained calm. "I'm not weaponizing anything. I'm protecting this company. The news broke this morning. Headlines questioning your judgment, your personal ethics. Investors are calling. Some want answers, others want reassurance." Julian placed both hands on the table. "Then let me be clear. I have nothing to hide. I have a daughter. Her name is Amara. She's 7 years old, and I didn't know she existed until yesterday. If that's enough to cost me your trust, then maybe this board needs to examine its own values." "Julian," one board member interjected, "it's not about the child, it's about how it looks, the secrecy, the optics, you understand." "Do you want a CEO who hides his daughter?" Julian asked, voice rising slightly, "or one who stands beside her?" The room went quiet. Charles tapped the folder in front of him. "We have a proposal, a temporary leave of absence. You step aside quietly while we manage the fallout. Let the PR team work. You come back once this distraction fades." Julian stared at the folder like it was poison. I'm not walking away from my daughter, and I'm not walking away from this company. A younger board member spoke up. There's another option. Let the public see who you are now, not who you were. Introduce your daughter, be transparent. That authenticity could turn the tide. Charles scoffed. You want him parading a child through the media circus? But Julian paused. Slowly, he looked up. Maybe that's not the worst idea. Charles narrowed his eyes. Don't be a fool. Julian's voice was calm but firm. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about legacy. And my legacy starts with telling the truth. He turned and walked out before anyone could stop him. As the board murmured behind him, Charles sat motionless, his grip on the folder tightening. Julian had just made a choice, and it was the one thing Charles never expected: to choose love over legacy. Back in the office, Sophia was pacing by the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She hadn't spoken since Julian left for the boardroom, her anxiety growing with every minute. Amara sat at Julian's desk, coloring quietly on the back of a printed spreadsheet, unaware of the storm swirling outside those walls. When Julian returned, Sophia turned sharply. Well? He closed the door behind him and exhaled slowly. They wanted me to step down, hide. Let the PR team bury this and pretend it never happened. Sophia's face fell. And? I said no, he answered simply. I told them the truth matters more than their comfort. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then her voice lowered. You're risking everything. Your career, your reputation. Julian looked at her with quiet intensity. You risked everything to raise her alone. This is the least I can do. Amara perked up. Are we still in trouble? Julian crouched beside her. Not trouble. Just change. But it's the good kind, I think. She nodded, accepting that without question. Then Julian stood and turned to Sophia. There's something I'd like to ask you, but it's big. And I know it might be too much. She crossed her arms again, trying to brace herself. Go on. I want to hold a press conference today, just a short statement. I want the world to hear the truth directly from me. No spin, no cover-up, just us. Her mouth opened slightly. You want to go public? He nodded. I want them to see her, see you, hear the real story. If I'm going to lead this company and be her father, I have to stop hiding. Sophia hesitated. Her instinct was to protect Amara from the world, to keep her safe in the shadows where no one could hurt her. But she also saw something new in Julian's eyes, conviction and love. She's just a child, Julian, she whispered. The cameras, the questions. Are you sure she's ready for that? He looked toward Amara again, who was now humming softly, completely at peace in her own little world. I don't know if she's ready, he said quietly, but I know I am. Sophia was silent for a long moment. Then finally she said, Okay. Julian blinked. You'll do it? She nodded. If we do this, we do it together, as a family. He swallowed hard. Thank you. But before they could say more, Julian's assistant burst in without knocking. There's a problem, she said breathlessly. Your father just announced a press statement of his own. Julian's stomach dropped. What did he say? She held up her phone. He's calling Amara a fabrication and accusing Sophia of extortion. Julian's face went pale as he read the headline on the screen. Langston heir targeted by former lover in paternity hoax, claims chairman. Below it, Charles's carefully worded statement accused Sophia of manipulating Julian with a child she could not prove was his, calling the timing of her reappearance convenient and suspicious. Julian's hands clenched into fists. He's trying to discredit both of you, make it look like this is some kind of scheme. Sophia's face flushed with fury and humiliation. He really thinks I'd use my daughter like that. No, Julian said. He doesn't believe a word of it. He's just terrified of the truth. Amara stood up slowly, sensing the shift in energy. Mommy, did I do something wrong again? Sophia knelt in front of her. No, baby, not at all. She looked up at Julian. We need to do that press conference, now. Julian turned to his assistant. Get the media team, call the PR office, we're going live in 1 hour. Things moved quickly after that. The Silvercrest press room was converted into a simple, clean setup. A podium, a few chairs, and a row of cameras being aligned and tested. Outside, word had already spread. Reporters gathered at the gates, flashes popping as they tried to glimpse the child at the center of the storm. Julian walked into the room with Amara holding his hand. Sophia walked beside them, her face calm but unreadable. "Remember," Julian whispered to Amara, "you don't have to say anything. Just stand with us, okay?" She nodded bravely. As the lights came up and the cameras began to roll, Julian stepped behind the podium and looked out at the sea of flashing bulbs and skeptical faces. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "My name is Julian Langston. I'm the CEO of Silvercrest Holdings, and today I'm not speaking to you as an executive or a figurehead. I'm speaking to you as a father." The room fell silent. He continued, "Yesterday I discovered I had a daughter. Her name is Amara. She is 7 years old, kind, bright and courageous beyond her years. Her mother, Sophia, and I had a past that ended too soon, and through a series of decisions, mine and others, we lost touch. But fate brought us back together in this very building." He paused, then looked down at Amara, who stood proudly beside him. "I didn't know, but now I do, and I won't pretend otherwise, or let anyone shame her or her mother for the truth." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed composed. Julian looked back at the cameras. "My father has released statements meant to distort that truth, but I'm standing here today to tell you this is not a scandal. This is a second chance." But just as the room quieted, a voice shouted from the back, "Do you have proof she's yours, Mr. Langston?" Julian froze, and slowly, all eyes turned to Amara. Julian's gaze shifted quickly to Amara. She stood still, small and brave beside him, her eyes wide but unafraid. The question hung in the air like a thunderclap, demanding proof, demanding something more than love and memory. He stepped forward, voice firm. "DNA tests are being processed, and I have no doubt what they'll confirm, but I don't need a piece of paper to tell me what I already know." The room was tense. Reporters whispered, pens scratched against notepads, cameras zoomed in on every detail. Sophia stepped beside him now, her voice calm but full of emotion. Julian wasn't there for Amara's birth. "That's not his fault. I left because I believed I was protecting her, but I never once told her he was a bad man. She always knew he was out there, kind, strong, and good." Julian reached for Amara's hand again. "The first time I heard her sing, I knew. The song was the one Sophia used to hum to me when we were just two struggling souls dreaming of a future we never got to share. No one else knew that melody. No one but us." The reporters quieted. One of them lowered her camera slowly. Julian looked down at Amara. "Do you want to say anything?" She shook her head, but then after a moment she stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice was soft but clear. "I'm not a lie," she said simply. "I'm real. He's my daddy now." And then, without warning, she began to hum the melody again, the lullaby. The room fell completely silent. Some people lowered their phones. A few gasped. One older journalist wiped away a tear. Sophia put a hand over her mouth, and Julian just watched his daughter sing, his throat tight with pride, and something deeper, healing. When she finished, Amara stepped back beside him, and Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "This," he said to the room, "is what legacy looks like, and I won't be ashamed of it." The flash of cameras resumed, not with aggression this time, but with curiosity, with wonder. As they exited the press room, Sophia turned to Julian, her voice barely a whisper. "You just gave up the protection of silence." He nodded. "I don't want protection anymore. I want her." But as they turned the corner, they were stopped by a familiar face. Julian's lawyer, pale and sweating. "There's something you need to see," he said, holding out a folder. "Your father. He's filed a petition." Julian's stomach dropped. What kind of petition? The lawyer hesitated. He's filing for custody of Amara. Julian stood frozen in the hallway, the lawyer's words echoing in his ears like a siren. Custody of Amara. Sophia reached for the folder with trembling fingers. This has to be a mistake. He's not even her. She couldn't finish the sentence. Julian took the folder and scanned the top page. The legal language was cold and strategic. Charles Langston had filed an emergency petition for temporary custody of Amara, citing Julian's mental instability and Sophia's financial incapacity to provide a stable, secure environment for the child. "This is war," Julian muttered. Sophia's voice broke. "He's trying to take her from us." Julian handed the file back to the lawyer. "File a counterclaim immediately. I want a restraining order to prevent contact with her until the court hears our side." The lawyer hesitated. "Julian, with the publicity and your father's influence, this won't be easy. The judge will demand proof that Amara's well-being is safest with you and Sophia." "We are the safe choice," Julian snapped, "and I'll prove it." Back in Julian's apartment that night, a place Sophia had never seen until now, they tried to breathe. It was sleek and modern, with expansive views of the city, but none of that mattered. All Sophia saw was Amara curled up on the couch, holding her stuffed rabbit, asking why she couldn't go home yet. Sophia crouched beside her. "This is home for now, sweetie. Just for a little while." Julian sat down across from them, looking more human than ever. He had taken off his tie, his shirt wrinkled from the long day. "We need to prepare," he said. "My father won't back down until we show the court exactly what kind of man he is." Sophia nodded slowly. "There's something I never told you." He looked up. "When I left all those years ago, it wasn't just because of the pressure, or Victoria. Your father came to see me, at my apartment. I was 2 months pregnant." Julian leaned forward, his voice tight. "What did he say?" "He gave me a check, $10,000, told me to leave the city, said you were destined for greatness, and I was a mistake that would ruin it." Julian's face hardened. "He paid you off?" Sophia's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I tore up the check. But I left anyway. I thought maybe he was right." Julian stood, pacing now. "That changes everything. If the court hears that, they'll say it's not proof," Sophia said bitterly. "Just my word against his." Julian stopped pacing. "Then we'll need more than words." And right then the apartment intercom buzzed. The doorman's voice crackled through. "Sir, there's a visitor. A woman. Says her name is Victoria Langston." Julian froze, eyes narrowing at the sound of her name. Sophia stood slowly, instinctively pulling Amara closer to her side. The air thickened as if a ghost had just slipped into the room before even entering. He walked over to the intercom panel and pressed the button. "Send her up." "Julian," Sophia began, but he held up a hand. "I need to know what she wants." Moments later, the elevator chimed and the doors slid open to reveal Victoria, poised as ever, in a charcoal grey coat and high heels. But her usual icy demeanor was cracked, just slightly. Her eyes were tired, her lips thinner than usual, and for once she wasn't wearing the polished armor of performance. Julian didn't invite her in. Victoria stepped inside anyway. She looked at Sophia first, then her gaze landed on Amara. For a heartbeat, her mask dropped entirely. Her voice softened. "She looks exactly like you did at that age, Julian." He crossed his arms. "Why are you here?" "I thought you might want to know what your father's planning next," she said, not wasting time. "He's not just going for custody, he's moving assets, calling in favors with judges. He's trying to destroy Sophia's credibility before the court date even gets scheduled." Sophia stiffened. "Why would you tell us that?" Victoria met her eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to be discarded by Charles Langston. I was supposed to be part of this dynasty, remember? But the second I said I wouldn't marry Julian for optics, I was out." Julian's jaw tensed. You were never out. You chose distance. But you were never cut off. Victoria shrugged. Not officially, but I know when I've been replaced, and I saw what Charles did to my mother after their affair. He has a long history of making women disappear. Sophia frowned. Why now? Why help us? Victoria hesitated, then pulled a slim folder from her purse. Because I kept a copy of something. Something I never thought I'd use. She placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside was a scanned check, dated 7 years ago. $10,000, payable to Sophia Morel, signed by Charles Langston. Sophia gasped. You had this? I worked with his financial team for years, Victoria said. I saw everything. I made a copy before they could delete it. I didn't know what it was for until now. Julian stared at the check, his hands shaking. This proves it. Not entirely, Victoria added, but with Sophia's testimony. And this, it creates doubt. It tells a story, one that a judge might believe. Julian looked up. Why are you really doing this? Victoria glanced toward Amara again. Because no child should be used as a weapon, and because maybe I want to be the one who finally stands against Charles Langston. The folder with the scanned check sat on the coffee table like a loaded gun, evidence not just of corruption, but of betrayal. Julian stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tight, hands resting on his knees. Sophia paced near the window, her thoughts spinning. If we present this to the court, Charles will retaliate. He'll dig through my past, my work history, everything. Victoria crossed her arms, unshaken. Let him. If he takes this to court, he'll be forced to explain why he wrote that check in the first place. Even Charles can't talk his way around this. Julian finally stood. We're filing a full report first thing tomorrow. Not just a counterclaim, an official petition for permanent custody, with Charles completely removed from any legal influence over Amara. Sophia nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. And if the court asks why now? Why not years ago? Julian looked directly at her. Because I didn't know, but now I do, and I'm not leaving her side again. Amara peeked around the corner, holding her stuffed rabbit close. Are we going somewhere again? Julian knelt in front of her. Not today, sweetheart, but tomorrow we'll go see someone nice who'll help us make sure no one takes you away from your mummy, or from me. Amara gave a tiny nod and wrapped her arms around his neck. Okay. Victoria stood back, watching the moment unfold. She didn't belong in that picture, not anymore, but she also didn't regret being part of it now. I should go, she said softly. That check is all I can give you. Use it well. Sophia stepped toward her. Why did you really keep it? Victoria paused, then said quietly, Because deep down I always knew Charles would use it against you one day. I just didn't expect I'd be the one handing it back. She walked toward the elevator, heels clicking softly, her head held high, not with pride but with resolve. As the door slid shut behind her, Julian turned back to Sophia. We're going to win this. But Sophia wasn't so sure. Her hands were shaking again. I've fought alone for so long. I don't know how to let someone else fight for us. Julian stepped closer. You're not alone anymore. Suddenly the apartment phone rang, an internal line. Julian picked it up. A voice came through, urgent. Mr. Langston? I thought you should know your father was just spotted entering the family estate, with a family lawyer and 2 private investigators. Julian's blood ran cold. What is he doing now? The voice hesitated. We think he's preparing to challenge your custody too. He's trying to prove you're unfit by going after your past. Julian slammed the receiver down, his pulse racing. The idea that Charles would stoop to attacking not just Sophia, but him, his own son, was a line he hadn't fully believed his father would cross. Until now. He's coming after both of us, Julian said grimly. If he can't paint you as unstable, he'll paint me as irresponsible, emotionally unfit. Anything to prove we're both incapable of raising her. Sophia sat down heavily, her hands in her lap. What could he possibly find? You've never even had a scandal. Julian hesitated. His silence stretched too long. Sophia's eyes snapped to his. "Julian?" He exhaled slowly. "There was a lawsuit, years ago. It was sealed, settled quietly before it reached court. A former executive assistant accused me of negligence during a restructuring period, said the stress caused her a breakdown. The board handled it. I was cleared, but if he unseals it, it'll look like I ignored mental health red flags in my own team." Sophia shook her head. "That's weak. That doesn't make you unfit as a father." "It doesn't need to be true," Julian said. "It just needs to raise enough doubt." The room went still. Amara had fallen asleep on the couch, her little body curled in a ball under a soft throw blanket. In the quiet, the weight of what they were fighting for became suddenly, overwhelmingly real. Sophia whispered, "He doesn't even know her, he doesn't love her, this is all just about power." Julian moved closer, sitting beside her. "Exactly. And that's the one thing he'll never understand. Love isn't leverage. It's not a currency you spend to win. That's why he can't win this, not if we stay honest and stay together." There was a long silence. Then Sophia said, "We need to go public again, but not with a statement, with a story." Julian looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" She stood slowly. "We let a journalist in, someone reputable, someone who can tell the truth before Charles spins the entire narrative. We let them into our lives, let them see us, not just in press rooms, but here, with Amara, with everything." Julian was quiet for a long time. Then, he nodded. "I know the right person." He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name, Isla Chen, investigative feature reporter, The Tribune. She was known for her integrity, for stories that shifted public opinion, not with sensation but with humanity. He hit dial. As it rang, Sophia came to stand beside him, hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The voice answered, "Isla Chen." Julian took a breath. "It's Julian Langston. I have a story, and I want you to be the one to tell it." The next afternoon, Isla Chen arrived at Julian's penthouse with nothing but a slim leather notebook, a discreet microphone, and eyes sharp with curiosity. She greeted Sophia first, her demeanor warm and respectful, then knelt to introduce herself to Amara, something no reporter had done before. "Hi, Amara. I'm Ila. I just want to talk to your parents today, okay?" Amara nodded shyly, holding tightly to her rabbit. They settled into the living room, the late afternoon light casting a golden glow across the sleek glass windows. Ila sat on the edge of a low chair, notebook open, pen poised. "So, you're offering me exclusive access to one of the biggest stories of the year. Why now?" Julian glanced at Sophia before answering. "Because the truth is already out there, but it's twisted, manipulated. My father's made sure of that. We want you to see the real story, who we are, what's really at stake." Sophia leaned in. "Not just a company, not just a legacy, a little girl's life." Ila nodded slowly, then asked gently, "And what would you say to people who believe this is just about reclaiming control of a narrative?" Julian didn't hesitate. "They're not wrong, but it's not about PR. It's about protection. For Amara, for Sophia, and yes, for the truth." Over the next hour, the questions deepened. Ila asked about their past, how Julian and Sophia met, how they lost each other, how they reconnected. She asked about Charles, about the check, about the silence that had stretched for years. Julian held nothing back, neither did Sophia. When Isla asked about Amara's understanding of the situation, Sophia answered quietly, "She knows her world is changing. She doesn't know it's under threat, and we'd like to keep it that way." Isla paused, then asked a final question. "And what happens if the court rules in your father's favor?" Julian looked toward the couch, where Amara had fallen asleep again, head resting in Sophia's lap. "Then I'll keep fighting," he said. "I'll fight until there's no court left to hear me. I won't let a man like Charles Langston raise my daughter." Isla nodded, closing her notebook. Thank you. I'll get to work tonight. This story, it might just shift everything. As she left, Julian walked her to the elevator. You believe us? He asked. Isla turned, her gaze steady. I do, and more than that, I think people will too. But as the doors closed and Julian returned to the quiet apartment, his phone vibrated with a new message. It was from the lawyer. Urgent. Judge has agreed to hear Charles's custody petition this Friday. Hearing will be closed. No press allowed. Julian looked at Sophia. He's accelerating the case. And for the first time she whispered, what if we lose? The courthouse loomed under grey clouds that threatened rain, its stone steps slick with early morning mist. Julian stood outside the doors, adjusting his tie with nervous hands, while Sophia held Amara's hand tightly. The little girl wore a simple navy dress and clutched her rabbit, her eyes scanning the towering pillars without understanding the gravity of what lay inside. It's just a meeting, Sophia whispered to her. With some grown-ups, Mommy and Daddy will talk and then we'll go home. Amara nodded, trusting, though her grip didn't loosen. Julian's lawyer approached, his face grim. Charles is already inside. He brought 2 witnesses and his legal team. No cameras, no press. It's just us and the judge. Sophia swallowed hard. Witnesses? The lawyer hesitated. One is a child psychologist. The other, a woman claiming to have worked with you at the shelter in Queens. She's prepared to testify that you left Amara unattended once during a shift. That's a lie, Sophia snapped. Julian stepped closer. They're trying to smear you, discredit everything. We stick to the truth. That's all we can do. They entered the courtroom, a small chamber with wooden benches and dim lighting. The judge, a composed woman in her 60s, reviewed her notes as everyone took their seats. Charles sat at the opposite table, looking as calm and regal as ever in a black tailored suit. Julian stared at him. His father didn't even glance back. The judge began. This is a closed hearing regarding temporary and potential permanent custody of a minor, Amara Morell. Parties present are Mr. Charles Langston, Mr. Julian Langston, and Ms. Sophia Morell. She looked over her glasses. Let's begin with Mr. Charles Langston's petition. Charles's lawyer stood, presenting a rehearsed argument, that Amara's safety was at risk, that neither parent had demonstrated adequate long-term stability, and that Charles, with his wealth and structure, could offer the child the life she deserves. Sophia nearly laughed aloud at the phrase. Next came the witness, the supposed shelter worker. She stood and gave a calm, confident statement, claiming she once saw Amara playing outside alone for over an hour, while Sophia argued on the phone. Julian leaned into his lawyer. This never happened. The lawyer nodded. She was likely paid. But we need to stay focused. When it was Julian's turn to speak, he stood slowly, clearing his throat. Your Honor, I had no idea I had a daughter until recently. That fact alone has changed everything for me. I'm not here to defend a perfect past. I'm here to fight for her future. He turned toward Amara, who sat with Sophia in the back row. She is not an obligation. She's my heart. The judge scribbled notes. And what makes you believe your father is unfit for custody? Julian hesitated, and then from behind a new voice spoke. Because I can testify that he paid her to disappear. All heads turned as Victoria stepped into the courtroom, uninvited, unafraid. Gasps rippled through the small courtroom as Victoria approached the witness stand, her heels clicking against the polished floor like punctuation marks in the stunned silence. Even Charles, ever composed, flinched, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her. The judge looked up, visibly surprised. And you are? Victoria Langston, she said firmly. Former executive at Silvercrest, and, until recently, the fiancée of Julian Langston. Charles's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, this witness is not on the docket. She's here at my request, Julian said calmly. I filed her name with the court clerk this morning. The judge raised a brow, then nodded. Proceed. Victoria stepped into the witness box, took the oath, and met the judge's gaze with clear, steady eyes. I'm here to confirm that Charles Langston attempted to erase Sophia Morel and her unborn child from Julian's life 7 years ago. I saw the transaction myself. Charles shifted in his seat. This is absurd. Let her speak, the judge interrupted. Victoria opened the folder she carried and held up the scanned image of the check. This is a copy of the payment Charles issued. $10,000. He told Sophia to leave New York, never contact Julian again, and protect his son's future. I kept the copy because I knew one day it would matter. The judge leaned forward. Why come forward now? Victoria exhaled. Because I see a child being used as a pawn, and because no matter how complicated my history with Julian is, I know what kind of father he can be. I also know the kind of man Charles really is. Sophia stared at her, stunned. Even Julian seemed taken aback by the clarity in her voice. The judge reviewed the copy of the check, then looked at Charles. Mr. Langston, do you deny this transaction? Charles smirked, his voice smooth. I made a donation, a gesture of support to help a struggling woman relocate. There were no conditions. Victoria scoffed. That's a lie. The judge raised her hand. Enough. This testimony will be included in the official record. She turned to Sophia. Ms. Morel, please approach. Sophia stood slowly, heart pounding. She took the stand, hands folded tightly in her lap. Ms. Morel, the judge began, why did you leave without informing Mr. Langston of the pregnancy? Sophia glanced at Charles, then back at the judge. Because I was told my child would never be accepted. I was scared. I had no support. I made the best choice I could at the time, and I've never regretted keeping my daughter safe. The judge studied her. And do you believe that continues to be your priority now? Sophia's voice didn't waver. Always. From the back row, Amara called softly, Mommy? All heads turned. She was standing, alone. I want to stay with you. The courtroom fell into a hush as Amara's small voice echoed in the silence. She stood near the wooden barrier, fingers gripping the edge as she looked at the judge, not with fear, but with the clarity only a child could possess. I want to stay with my mommy, she repeated. And with him, too. She pointed at Julian. He's my daddy now. Sophia rose instinctively, moving toward her, but the judge raised a hand gently. It's all right. Let her speak. Amara looked uncertain for a moment, but when the judge smiled softly, she stepped forward. The court officer opened the gate for her, and she walked to the stand. The judge leaned forward. Amara, do you know why we're here today? Amara nodded slowly. Because someone wants to take me away. And how does that make you feel? Amara looked at Julian, then at Sophia. Scared. I don't want to go anywhere else. I like it when we eat together, when he reads me stories, when Mommy sings to me. I didn't know I had a daddy, but now that I do, I don't want to lose him. Julian swallowed hard. Charles's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The child is under emotional distress and not of age to... The judge turned sharply. She's expressing her feelings. That's the only thing in this courtroom today that hasn't been rehearsed. The lawyer sat back down, defeated. Amara continued, I know my grandpa is mad. He says things that make people scared. But I'm not scared of my mommy. Or my daddy, just of him. Julian's hands clenched under the table. The judge nodded solemnly. Thank you, Amara. You may return to your seat. As she walked back to Sophia and climbed into her lap, the judge straightened her notes and addressed the room. This court has heard arguments from both sides. We've seen evidence, heard testimonies, some deeply troubling, others deeply moving. She looked directly at Charles. It is my duty to determine what environment will serve the child's best interest, not the legacy of any family, not the optics of reputation, but the safety, love, and support of a 7-year-old girl. Charles stared back, unreadable. The judge turned toward Julian and Sophia. I will issue a ruling within the next 48 hours. Until then, Amara will remain under the temporary joint custody of both biological parents. Mr. Langston Sr. is hereby restricted from unsupervised contact with the child. Sophia's breath caught. Julian reached for her hand beneath the table. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Court is adjourned. As they stood, Julian turned to Victoria, his voice low. Thank you, truly. She offered a half smile. I told the truth. It was about time someone did. But as they stepped out into the cool air, Julian's lawyer pulled him aside with a troubled expression. There's something else. Charles has filed an injunction with the board. Julian frowned. What kind of injunction? He's trying to strip you of executive power immediately. Julian felt the blow like a punch to the gut. He's what? The lawyer nodded grimly. An emergency injunction. He's claiming that due to your personal turmoil and public scandal, you're no longer fit to represent the company's interests. Sophia, holding Amara close, overheard. He's going after everything. Your role, your reputation, anything to take back control. Julian clenched his jaw, rage simmering beneath his skin. He doesn't care about the company. He just wants to win, to destroy everything that doesn't bow to him. The lawyer pulled a folder from his briefcase. The board meeting's scheduled for tomorrow morning. He's bringing in 3 new proxy votes, investors who've been promised increased shares if they vote in favor of his motion. Julian shook his head. He's orchestrating a coup. Amara looked up at him with tired eyes. Daddy, are we going to lose now? He knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Not a chance. Not as long as we stand together. Back at the apartment, the night was heavy with silence. Sophia tucked Amara into bed, humming the lullaby softly as Julian sat nearby, staring at the legal documents stacked across the table. She's exhausted, Sophia said quietly, returning to the living room, but she doesn't want to sleep alone tonight. Julian looked up, his voice raw. Neither do I. They sat on the couch, shoulders touching, the tension slowly replaced by the familiar ache of connection. Sophia sighed. When this started, I thought the hardest part would be telling you the truth. I never imagined we'd end up here, fighting your father, facing court, defending our daughter to the world. Julian nodded. I thought my life was under control, that I had built something stable, but none of it mattered, not without her, not without you. She looked at him, surprised. Do you mean that? He met her eyes. Every word. I know I lost you once. I won't do it again. They sat in silence, the city lights flickering through the window. Then Julian's phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. You need to see this. Check the Tribune's front page. It's everywhere. He opened the news site. There, at the top, was Ila Chen's feature story. The Song of Truth. How a forgotten melody reunited a father, a daughter, and the woman he lost. Below the headline was a picture. Amara holding both Julian's and Sophia's hands, mid-laugh, a real moment Ila had captured after the interview. The article was powerful, poetic, heartbreaking, redeeming. It detailed everything: the hidden past, the reunion, the courtroom battle, the check, Victoria's testimony. It ended with Amara's quote, I didn't know I had a daddy, but now I do, and I want to keep him. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. This could change everything. But Julian wasn't smiling yet. His eyes were still on the screen, because just below the story, a breaking alert flashed across the site. Silvercrest Board to vote on emergency leadership transfer, 8 a.m. tomorrow. The boardroom was already full when Julian arrived the next morning. He entered in silence, his step steady, his jaw set. No tie today, just a black suit, open collar, eyes sharp and resolute. Sophia waited outside with Amara, per his request. This wasn't a place for either of them, not today. Inside, Charles Langston sat at the head of the table like a king returning to his throne. His eyes met Julian's with a cold, victorious gleam. The board chair stood. We've convened this emergency session at the request of Charles Langston, founder and majority shareholder, regarding leadership restructuring due to personal disruptions affecting public trust. Julian didn't flinch. You mean because I told the truth? Charles raised a hand. Let's keep this civil. This is about preserving shareholder value. You've dragged your private life into the spotlight, compromised company image, and aligned yourself with someone who, until recently, was employed as cleaning staff. Julian leaned forward. You mean the woman you paid to disappear? The one who raised my daughter alone while I spent years being lied to? A few board members stirred. I've read the article, said one woman, and I've spoken to clients who called us to say the story made them respect this company more. Another nodded. Human truth goes further than numbers. It shows strength, not weakness. Charles's expression hardened. Emotion isn't strategy. Julian stood slowly. No, but it's humanity. And if Silvercrest wants to survive the future, it needs more of it. You all know what kind of leader I've been, what numbers I've hit. You also know what kind of man he's always been behind those closed doors. He paused. And if any of you still believe he represents the values of this company better than I do, then vote. The chair cleared his throat. Very well. All those in favor of transferring executive authority to Charles Langston, raise your hands. A beat. 2 hands. 3. Charles smiled. But then, the rest remained still. 5 members. Then 6. The tide didn't turn. One of them spoke. We decline the motion. Julian stays. The vote was over. Charles's smile faded. His hands curled on the edge of the table. Julian turned to him, calm but cold. You've lost, Father. Not just this company. You've lost the right to control everything, including me. The room fell silent. Then the board chair stood. Motion denied. Meeting adjourned. Julian walked out without looking back. Outside the glass doors, Sophia stood holding Amara's hand. He smiled and dropped to one knee as Amara ran to him. It's over, he whispered. Sophia joined them, tears in her eyes. But just as they embraced, Julian's phone buzzed once more. Ruling posted, custody decision is in. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he opened the email. Sophia leaned in, her heart pounding in her chest, while Amara looked up at both of them, sensing the moment was heavy, though not yet understanding why. The courthouse had posted the official ruling. The subject line was cold and factual. Family Court Decision, Langston v. Morel. Julian read silently, lips moving, until finally he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His eyes glistened with tears. She's staying with us, he said softly. Full custody awarded to Sophia Morel. Joint parental rights granted to me. Sophia gasped, covering her mouth. Are you serious? He nodded, his voice catching. Charles has been barred from all contact pending further review. The court ruled his conduct coercive and manipulative, unfit for guardianship. Amara clapped her hands, even without fully grasping the details. Does that mean I get to live with you now forever? Sophia knelt beside her, eyes full of tears. Yes, baby. Forever. Julian wrapped them both in his arms, unable to speak for a long moment. When they finally stood, a crowd had begun to gather outside the building. Reporters, onlookers, even strangers who had read the article and come to offer support. A few held signs. Truth over legacy. Family wins. Let her sing. Julian stepped out with Sophia and Amara, their hands interlocked. Flashbulbs popped, but no one shoved or shouted. The energy was different now. Isla Chen was there, notebook in hand. She smiled when she saw them. Looks like the story found its ending. Julian shook her hand. You helped more than you know. I just told the truth, Isla replied. The rest, you lived. Later that evening, they returned to the apartment. Amara danced through the halls, chasing the echo of her own laughter, her stuffed rabbit under one arm. Sophia sat on the couch, finally able to relax for the first time in years. Julian returned with a small box. There's something I want to show you both. He opened the box, revealing a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a single charm shaped like a musical note. It was my mother's, Julian said quietly. She used to sing to me. It was the only thing my father couldn't take away from her. I think it should go to Amara now." He placed it around his daughter's neck. Her eyes lit up. "It's so pretty." "It's yours," he said, "a reminder of your voice and your strength." Amara hugged him tightly. As night fell and the city lights shimmered through the windows, Sophia stood behind Julian and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved her," she whispered. He looked up at her. "No, she saved me." Weeks passed, and life began to settle into something resembling normal, if not a little extraordinary. The media storm faded, replaced by quieter stories of resilience and redemption. The public had not only accepted the truth about Julian and Amara, they had embraced it. Silvercrest stock recovered. Investors, once hesitant, now praised Julian for his honesty and integrity. Internally, the company's culture began to shift. He had ushered in something new, a leadership rooted in transparency, compassion, and balance. But while the corporate world healed, something more intimate unfolded at home. One Saturday morning, Julian woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Amara singing in the kitchen. She stood on a stool beside Sophia, flipping batter with her small hands covered in flour. He stood quietly at the doorway, just watching. The melody she hummed was that same lullaby, soft and bright. But now it didn't sound lonely. Now it sounded full. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Sophia said, noticing him. "Good morning," he replied, stepping forward and kissing her cheek. "Smells like peace." "Smells like burned pancakes," Amara corrected, giggling. They sat together at the table, laughing, talking, being what they hadn't been allowed to be for so long, just a family. Later that afternoon, Julian took Amara to a nearby park. It wasn't fancy, just a neighborhood space with a few swings and some patchy grass. She didn't care. She ran barefoot through the sunlight, her laughter ringing like bells. A few children approached her, whispering excitedly. One little girl asked, "Are you the singing girl from the story?" Amara looked at Julian. He smiled. "It's okay." She nodded proudly. "Yes, that's me." The girl smiled wide. "You're famous," Amara just laughed. "I'm just me." That night, as Sophia tucked Amara into bed, the little girl looked up and whispered, "Mommy, are we going to stay like this forever?" Sophia brushed a curl from her forehead. "Yes, baby, forever." She turned off the light and joined Julian on the balcony, where he stood gazing out at the city. "She's happy," Sophia said. "She's safe," Julian added. They leaned into each other. For the first time in years, there were no secrets, no lies. Only love, and the long road they'd walked to get back to it. But just as Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, Julian's phone buzzed again. He looked down and frowned. "What is it?" she asked. He showed her the screen. "Private number, 1, new voicemail." He hit play. A woman's voice came through. "Julian, I don't know if you remember me, but we need to talk. It's about your mother." Julian's blood turned cold. He stared at the phone, the message playing in his mind again and again. "It's about your mother." Sophia looked at him, sensing the shift in his expression. "Julian, what is it?" He shook his head slowly, as if trying to pull himself out of the past. "That voice, I haven't heard it in over 20 years. Who is she?" Julian walked inside, sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the phone again. "Her name was Marianne Ellis. She worked with my mother before she died. My father. He always said it was an accident. But I remember Marianne disappearing after the funeral. No goodbyes, just gone." Sophia sat beside him. "You think she knows something?" Julian nodded. "If she's reaching out now, after all this time, it has to be important." He called the number back. It rang 3 times before a click. "Julian?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Julian Langston." There was a long pause. Then, "I'm sorry to contact you like this. I didn't want to interfere. But I saw your story. I saw the girl. And I knew I had to tell you the truth." "What truth?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your mother. She didn't fall down the stairs." Julian's breath caught. What are you saying? I was there that night. Your father, he was angry. They argued about a check, about a woman named Sophia. Sophia's eyes widened. Julian leaned forward, gripping the phone. My mother died before I ever met Sophia. I know, Marianne said, but he had done something similar before, paid off someone. Lied to someone? She was tired of watching him ruin people. She was going to leave, and then she didn't. Julian stood, his world tilting. You're telling me my father. I'm telling you it wasn't an accident, and I've kept the letter she wrote the night she died. She told me to hold it for you, in case anything ever happened to her. I didn't think I'd ever need to give it to you. Until now. Julian was silent, stunned. I want to meet, Marianne said. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll be at the cafe on 6th and Alder. The line went dead. Sophia stood slowly. If this is true, everything changes. Julian nodded, his voice distant. It already has. Amara appeared at the hallway entrance, rubbing her eyes. Is everything okay? Julian forced a smile. It will be. Go back to sleep, honey. She nodded and disappeared back to her room. But Julian stayed awake, because tomorrow he wouldn't just face a truth about his father. He would open the final door to a past he never truly understood. The cafe on 6th and Alder was quiet the next morning, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, its windows fogged slightly from the summer humidity. Julian arrived early, the letter from the court still tucked into his jacket pocket, though it now felt like it belonged to a previous chapter. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened, and Marianne Ellis stepped inside. She was older now, with streaks of silver in her hair and deep lines around her eyes, but Julian recognized her instantly, the gentle woman who used to braid his mother's hair, who'd read to him when he was small, before vanishing from his life without a trace. She approached slowly, cautiously, like she wasn't sure if she'd be welcome. Julian stood. Marianne. She nodded. You look so much like her. They sat across from each other at a corner table. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Marianne opened her worn purse and pulled out an envelope. I've carried this for over 20 years. I should have given it to you sooner, but I was afraid. Your father, he had eyes everywhere. Julian took the envelope with shaking hands. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. Julian was written in his mother's cursive on the front. He opened it slowly, unfolding the single sheet inside. The letter read, My darling Julian, if you're reading this, then something has happened and I didn't get to tell you the truth myself. Your father is a man who values power above all else. He believes love is weakness, and he's tried to make me forget how to feel. But I remember what it was like to be your mother before everything turned cold. He's hiding things, Julian. He's paying people to disappear. I found a check he issued yesterday. He said it was a necessary transaction. I fear this isn't the first time. I fear what he's capable of if challenged. I wanted to leave, I was planning to, but if I don't get the chance, if something happens to me, please don't let his lies become your inheritance. You are better than him. You always were. Find your own truth, and never stop singing. Love. Mom. Julian stared at the page for a long time. Then he set it down, his hands trembling. She knew, he whispered. She knew what he was. Marianne's eyes were wet with tears. She tried to protect you the only way she could, but I failed her. No, Julian said, his voice stronger now. You didn't. You brought me this, and now I can finally end it. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and stood. Marianne rose too. What will you do? Julian looked out the window. I'm going to confront him. Charles Langston's estate had always been a fortress, grand, distant, and immaculate. Julian had walked its halls 1,000 times as a boy, always with polished shoes and perfect posture, but this time he walked in with a storm behind his eyes and the weight of his mother's letter burning in his jacket pocket. He didn't knock. The housekeeper recognized him and stepped aside silently. Charles was in his study, as always, surrounded by wood-paneled walls, brandy on the table, and the illusion of control wrapped tightly around him like a cloak. He looked up from his desk as Julian entered. "So, you're here to gloat?" Julian shut the door. "No, I'm here to finish this." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Whatever righteous speech you've prepared, spare me. You've won the child, the board, the media. Congratulations. Enjoy your little fairy tale." Julian stepped closer. "I spoke to Marianne Ellis." Charles's hand froze on his glass. "She gave me something," Julian continued. "A letter from Mom." The room seemed to still. Charles didn't move, didn't blink. Julian pulled the envelope from his coat, laid it on the desk. "She knew, Dad, about the checks, about the women, about what you did. She was going to leave." Charles finally looked up. "And yet, she didn't. Because she didn't get the chance," Julian snapped. "She fell. Or that's what I was told. But now, I think she was pushed, maybe not by your hands, but by your cruelty, your control." Charles stood slowly. "Be very careful what you imply." "I don't have to imply anything," Julian said. "Her words are enough, and now I understand everything you tried to keep from me. Why you wanted Sophia gone, why you hid Amara, why you always told me love was weakness." He stepped even closer. "Because it was the one thing you couldn't control." Charles's face twitched. "You think you're better than me now? Because you made headlines with your sob story? You're still standing on my empire." Julian smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Not anymore. I'm building my own, one she would have been proud of, one my daughter will never be ashamed of." He picked up the letter again and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "You may have built these walls, but you'll die in them alone." Charles didn't reply. Julian walked out, the letter tucked safely in his coat. Outside, Sophia and Amara were waiting in the car. He climbed in and took Amara's hand. "Ready to go home?" She smiled. "Always." As the car drove away, the city skyline rose before them, and behind them the old world crumbled quietly, one truth at a time. The end